Hi, welcome to Matters of the Heart and Soul. I'm your host, Janie Charlo. Matters of the Heart and Soul is a podcast to raise awareness and awaken humanity to all that is within. We want to be a beacon of light on your life journey. Hi, welcome to Matters of the Heart and Soul podcast. My name is Janie Charlo, your host, and I am co-hosting today with Mr. Russell Bruce.
Hello, everybody out there.
Matters of the Heart and Soul podcast is a podcast to raise awareness, to awaken humanity to everything that is already within. On today's episode, we are actually going to be speaking with Paul Debnam. He's a personal friend of John Lewis. So we'll be getting into the life and legacy of the civil rights icon, John Lewis. So, Paul, welcome to the show.
Good evening. Good evening. Glad to be here.
All right. So, Paul Debnam, we had Paul on the show one time before speaking on the Ahmaud Arbery case. And today, once again, like Janie stated, we're going to be talking about the life and legacy of the late, great John Lewis, political activist, civil rights icon. And let's jump into Paul's background here. Paul's a political activist, CEO and founder of the Debnam Group. Paul has been in politics for the past 30 years and has worked with the likes of John Lewis, Jesse Jackson, former Atlanta Mayor Bill Campbell. Also, he worked with presidential nominee John Kerry as a campaign strategist in Fort Myers, Florida. And Paul has also worked with professional athletes and entertainers on different ventures. So, Paul, once again, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. So kind, Mr. Russell.
All right. So, we've had several conversations over the years about your relationship with John Lewis. You're pretty tight with him. A lot of people across the country are posting about the great icon. I think this is the opportunity for people to get a little bit more of an intimate look into who he was in and outside of politics. So could you start off briefly by telling us how you met John Lewis and how you worked with him and so forth?
Well, the first time my first introduction to John was I was attending my last year of college at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and I attended the Black Caucus. And I'll never forget when all the congressional members walked out on the stage, and it was a very, very powerful experience because you see some of the most powerful Black men in the world, Black men and women. They walked out on the stage, and I never forgot it. And I met him, and I told him I was coming out to Atlanta after school, and my aspirations was to, play ball. I wanted to come in and become a free agent and try for the Hawks. Well, long story short, that didn't work out. Next thing I know, I was working on a campaign for John, and
Wow.
It started a friendship that lasted until 2 days ago. And I will say, John is one of the most magnificent individuals that I've ever met in my life, and it was a blessing to be able to grace his presence professionally, personally, and as a friend. Awesome man. Awesome man.
Paul, what is if you had to sum up 1 to 2 of the greatest lessons you learned from John Lewis, what would those 1 to 2 lessons be, if you could share with our listeners?
Great question. Thank you for asking. John, the first thing I would say has to do with religion and God. And I would say first and foremost that he was definitely sent by God. And we used to have the conversation all the time, how it's clear that it was something that God anointed and appointed him to do. Clear, hands down. And he was such an outstanding man. That God had to be behind everything that he touched. And I often would say the best lesson I learned from John Lewis is that if you were in his presence, you could feel his sweet spirit. You could feel that he had a great amount of integrity and character. And for the great things that happened in his life, you had to know that when you do things the right way, now it took me about 50 years to figure that out, but I got it, and I give John Lewis the credit for me being the man who I am today. When we met, I was immature. I didn't understand the full understanding of life. But it's kind of like when you're touched by an angel. When you're in the presence of an angel, you see unbelievable things. And if you're conscious and you're alive, it has a positive effect on you.
Mm-hmm.
So all the great things that happened to John, I don't know the numbers, more than 100 honorary doctors from schools like Harvard, Tuskegee. Only God could do that for a guy who was from Troy, Alabama, and he couldn't even get a library card growing up to go to the library and study. However, I was with him on the same street that he could not go into the library and get a library card. Several years later, they were honoring the same street and changed the name of John Lewis. So I've seen that over and over again in terms of John Lewis and how God will reward you for doing the right thing. That's the biggest lesson to all the people. Listen, when you do what's right and you know your calling, there's nothing impossible that God cannot do.
Wow.
That's so true.
So Paul, when I think of John Lewis, I always see Martin Luther King pop up as well, because he was, he's tied to King through infinity, right? Has he ever shared with you any of the stories about any of the marches and the traveling with King, any of those details, like what it was like to be on the front lines with King?
Wow, another great question. To be truthful, we would often talk about Dr. King and talk about the beloved community, talk about how Dr. King would often use the terminology that even when people would do you wrong, his idea was to love the hell out of them. And I remember vividly joking with him. I have different views now, but I would joke with him and say, John, if I was in your era, I don't know that I would be hanging out with you and Dr. King. I would be more, probably wanted to hang out more so with Malcolm X. But the whole thing with Martin Luther King, he was all about love. He was all about bringing people together.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know it was very effective.
Yeah. And it's like when you look at King's like our modern day Jesus, not trying to sound sacrilegious or anything. Like he's like the closest thing in America to Jesus to come and, speak in peace and love. And John is like one of those disciples of King. And tell me a little bit about what you know about his speech. John Lewis gave a fiery speech in the March on Washington that a lot of people probably didn't hear until just recently after his passing. You tend to learn a lot more about people after they pass. Tell me about his speech.
Well, the thing about the speech is there were two speeches, and a lot of people look at John as a peace warrior in terms of being an icon and talking about being about love and being very mild-mannered. But if truth be told, the first speech that he initially had written for the march had to be revised. Brother James Farmer, once he saw how radical John was speaking in the first speech, he basically pulled his coattail and said, "Hey, John, you can't go out there talking that kind of rhetoric. You got to tone it down." So he had to go back and write it, soften it up to make it more presentable to what Dr. King, because the thing about during that era, opposed to the era today, you have so many talking points. Mm-hmm. The distinction was back then, everybody was on the same page. And so John's speech had to coincide with what Dr. King was talking about. So it's amazing. A lot of people didn't even know he spoke, but he spoke before King, and that just shows the wherewithal and how long he's been around. And to be truthful, John carried the spirit of Dr. King
Mm-hmm.
until his dying day.
Wow.
He believed it, he lived it, he talked it, and he preached it. And I find myself, when I see, no matter what color you are, and I see another brother, I will always say, "How you doing, brother? How you doing, brother?"
Mm-hmm.
And I got that from John. He would address everyone as his brother, and I used to wonder about that. He would also say, "It's good to see you." And I recall vividly, I used to joke with him. I said, "Well, John, what if you saw Satan? Would you say it's good to see you?" And we just would laugh about it. But yeah, he was such a loving, outstanding guy. You could feel that everything that came from his heart, it was
Mm-hmm.
all about love.
It's like he
All about
embodied
love.
it.
Exactly. You would know. I recall being in malls anywhere in the country, and people of different origins would come up. I remember clearly one day a Caucasian lady walked up and she just started crying, saying, "You're my hero." And to see that, I'm thinking like I've never seen this type of reaction from anyone. I mean, women coming up crying, men coming up honoring him, saying that you're my hero. I appreciate what you're doing. You're a good guy. I know you mean well. And that's John Lewis. I could go on and on. I'm enjoying this because I'm kind of, it's refreshing to myself to share this story because it actually happened. These are all true experiences, and it's almost impossible to be around someone like him and not change your life.
Wow.
It's impossible.
Paul,
It's
we
good stuff.
we definitely appreciate your authenticity in answering our questions. Um, I do believe that love is very, very powerful. It can radically change your life, and when you're in the spirit of it, it you can't miss it, like you said.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. It's life changing, and it's
yeah,
so powerful. Even when he's not around, his
yeah,
spirit affects you even more.
yeah, exactly. Um, so let me ask you because
Forgive
they
me,
no,
but
it's not.
pause. I'm laughing at myself, but I said I wasn't gonna do this. But that's how powerful the guy was.
Hey, be real,
Yeah,
man.
yeah.
Be real.
Uh, Let me ask you. So they were um, they were great teachers in the spirit of love. I mean, uniting people of different races, civil rights, all in the spirit of love. Um, what do you think? Do you feel like that is what we need more of right now? Do we need to be more in the spirit of love as far as the recent protesting and like what are we not doing? What are we not getting? Or have we gotten too far from the spirit of love?
Well, that's a good question. Also, I think we definitely need love. We need love more than ever. But in the process of having love, we need unity. And Russ is an ex-basketball player, as myself. You need love, you need unity, but you need execution. And if you're trying to win a basketball game and everybody's going in a different direction, you're not going to win many basketball games. You're not going to win many games. However, with the love, unity, and execution, meaning action going in the same direction, you can't lose. You cannot lose. We
Let me ask you a question, Paul. In any of your conversations with John Lewis, did he ever speak about maybe there were some things that they did wrong, and if they had the chance to do it all over again, they would do something a little different?
Well, I will say this. I do recall not very long ago, probably 10 years ago, I don't know if he was happy with the Democratic Party. And I remember him saying something about maybe starting his own party because he didn't like the way the leadership up top was going. However, I've never heard him say anything about Dr. King and what he didn't do right or what they didn't do that could have been more effective. I think he was sold out, meaning whatever the coach or whatever the format was, he stuck with it until his dying day. There are some things that he didn't like, but, it wasn't concerning the leadership. Now, what I will, for me to make that comment that he didn't like something, I might as well, share that also. What most people don't know, and I can back it up, and maybe some people may even question, but there were some people, and I won't name the people, that often claim that they were involved in certain sectors of the civil rights movement where they claimed they did things and it just was not true. I mean, there was and even any basketball or athletics competition, the guy getting paid the most money don't always think that everybody on the team loves that guy. Don't always think that everybody in the locker room is in love with everyone. It's very rare that you have every member. And that went on a lot during the civil rights movement where different leaders, I mean, heck, at times, King wasn't always welcome in every town. There were some black ministers that deemed him a rebel rouser or troublemaker, and they didn't want him to come. So a lot of that played into jealousy and division. And I got that from John a lot, but he was the kind of guy, this is how great this guy was. He would never really anyone else. It was always positive or factual information to allow the movement or his point to get across anyone. So I had to kind of read between the lines and say, well, hey, he was unhappy with this, but he would never try to take the air out of someone, whatever they were trying to accomplish. He was a support kind of guy. He would love you. And even when you did him wrong, he was very forgiving. You could always come back and say, hey, John, I'm sorry. Well, I won't do it anymore.
Wow.
So, Paul, also we understand that John Lewis was also a reverend. Did you ever get a chance to hear him?
Absolutely. Yeah, he would preach. That's a great question too, Roger. You guys are asking. You're on fire tonight with the questions.
Thank you.
Whenever he would speak, well, first of all, he attended American Baptist College out of Nashville. Believe it or not, the same school where C.T. Vivian attended. And he was ordained minister. And I would often, excuse me?
I said, peace be unto that brother as well. He just passed as well.
Awesome, and I had the opportunity to work with him also. I mean, I look back, I was blessed to just, be around some of the most powerful people in the world. But getting back to John and the question you just inquired about, John was a great man of God all the way across the board. Mm-hmm. And I recall clearly when he would speak at different places, particularly churches, graduations, I knew all of his speeches from start to finish because I'd heard them so many times. But the way you want to get a real sermon out of John Lewis, and I told him a couple of times, I said, John, don't mess around and let a choir get up and sing one of those old school Baptist songs. You'd have to put your seatbelt on because he would be on fire.
Wow.
Don't let somebody get up and sing Amazing Grace. Songs that he heard growing up. You're going to hear something really special. When he would get up, and his sermon would always revolve around his life and what he went through. And when you compare the two, I don't know if I ever made this comparison. Now that looking back, his life was pretty similar to the way the walk of Christ, where he started out with nothing. I think his uncle gave him $100. He had to catch the bus to college, and he caught the bus to go see Dr. King. And he said when he walked in the church, he said Reverend Shuttleworth approached him and greeted him. And he brought him to Dr. King. And he said when he first met Dr. King, he said he didn't want to make a mistake and not allow Dr. King to know who he was. He said, my name is John Robert Lewis. He said he wanted to make sure Dr. King knew his full name.
Wow.
So, yeah, when he would speak and talk about his life, he would talk about the calling on his life, and the
Mm-hmm.
calling on his life was preaching. He said, well, the first sermon he ever preached was to the chickens, because at the time he had no one else to listen. He would preach to the chickens in the backyard.
Wow.
Yeah, I think I heard that or read that or
Yeah,
something. Yeah, about
yep.
that. Yeah.
Very humble beginnings. His father was a sharecropper, and started out with zero. Sharecropping, that's the next thing to slavery. But the thing about his life and his family, his dad ended up accumulating over 100 acres of land, maybe 300 acres of land. And the family still lives on that land now.
Wow.
And to go from zero, very humble beginnings where he had to chop wood, he had to, feed the chickens. They lived on a farm. I've been to the farm many times. And now to end up from Troy, Alabama, to be one of the most revered people in the world.
Yeah.
I like to use basketball as a reference. Everybody knows who Michael Jordan is. And 20 years ago, I'd say, hey, John Lewis is the Michael Jordan of politics.
Yeah.
He's no different from Arthur Ashe, the Vertal Welcomes of the world, the Harriet Tubmans. So when you look at his life as a whole, he started from humble beginnings. Now he's one of the most revered people in the world. Navy ships named after him. They're probably going to name the Edmund Pettus Bridge after John Lewis. Streets named after him. He went from having to take $100 from his uncle just to get to school, and not to speak about where he is now, but he ended up in a great position in
Yeah.
all areas, from spiritual to physical, to being well respected. I mean, it's a true Bible story, and he lived it.
Definitely. You mentioned the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Did you ever have a conversation about that particular day? Because that's like one of those landmark days in his life. When you speak of John Lewis, everybody remembers that particular march, because that was the day he was actually attacked and suffered a blow to the head.
Okay, well, once a year, March the, I don't know this, 10th or 11th, whatever day it happened on, they do the footsteps of Dr. King. So I've had an opportunity to experience that. So having to experience it so many times, I've asked several questions about it. And I've seen the video 1,000 times, and he talk about how when they first started to go across the bridge, he looked up and he saw a sea of blue, and the sea of blue were today's and yesterday's state troopers. But this time they were on several horses, and I never forget. He said that Hosea Williams was to his right, and before they started marching, he asked Hosea if he could swim, because that bridge is pretty high. So they really literally thought that they were not going to make it. And yes, he was fearful to some degree, but he knew he was willing to die for the cause. And he said he thought he was going to die. He was beaten. Yeah, when Dr. King saw the blood on John's head, he had a hat on himself, and he took the hat off and gave it to John because he didn't want the tissue to be exposed to germs or the sun. So he gave it to him.
Wow.
And that was the kind of person Dr. King was. He wanted to make sure John was okay. But that particular day, John felt like he wasn't going to live to see the next day, because he thought he was going to lose his life.
Wow.
Paul, when was the last time you talked to John Lewis?
The last time I talked to John was probably about the day we were down. I spoke to Russ. We were down by the Wendy's, and right after the riots in Atlanta, I just gotten back to town. I wanted to see the location where Brother Rashad was shot. So I was there. It was about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I realized the location is not very far from the cemetery where Dr. King and his father and his mother was buried. And not only they are buried there, the great Lillian Lewis, who I call lovingly Ma Lou, she was buried there. So I said to myself, I should go and visit a grave site because I haven't, had an opportunity to go by and see it. So I went by and took some pictures, and I made it my business to call John to let him know. And I said, John, I just stopped by to see Ma Lou. He was like, well, Paul, is that your first time? I said, yes, sir. Kind of tenderly. He's like, well, boy, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. I said, I know. I know. And we talk, and we would always end up with a call and let him know that I loved him. He said, I love you too. He'd always tell me to, stay out of trouble, do whatever I can to do the right thing. That was his whole thing. And I think that was the last time I spoke to him. But however, last week I was out in California, I was riding my bike, and Michael Collins texted me and said, well, do you like to talk to Congressman? Well, it was about 3:00 when he texted me. We're 3 hours behind. I will text till about 6. So when I saw it at 6, it was probably about 9, 10 o'clock over here. Well, 9 o'clock to be exact. So it was too late. So my thinking is he reached out to me last week, but I didn't get a chance to talk to him.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So you mentioned Ma Lou. I'm not sure if you told the listening audience that was his wife. Is that correct?
Lillian Lewis. And she was an amazing lady. I mean, we could do a whole nother show on her. She was the person, the backbone behind John. Anything that he wanted to do, she used to often say that they were a united front, and they were. I mean, they really, really loved each other. It was almost like the perfect kind of match. Similar to, I shared with Russ last night. I hope I don't get in trouble by saying that you guys are very similar, but you reminds me of a John Lewis and a Lillian. And the reason I say that, sometimes there's marriages where people get involved for the wrong reason, but sometimes every now and again there's a match made in heaven, and I see that guy that in you and Russ, or else you wouldn't be doing as well as you are. And that was Lily and John Lewis. They were like the ultimate couple.
Wow.
She was brilliant. Oh man, she was brilliant. I could call at 1:00 in the morning and ask her any question. She would have it. She would have a great answer. Great answer.
Yeah, I think, and I don't know her really well, but I do believe that some relationships are put together for a purpose in the spirit.
Absolutely.
And it sounds like that is exactly what they were doing.
It was amazing. I'll share this one story. I said, you know what? I'm around you guys all the time, and this is how they would address each other. John would say, Lillian, and Lillian would say, John. And I was like, man, Malu, have you ever had an argument? And she was like, I can't think of any time that we argued. She said, wait a minute. I remember one day, people don't realize John Lewis didn't get a driver's license until he was about 40 years of age. So one hot day in July, a friend had stopped by to visit them. And they had a 1984 Honda, and the car did not have air conditioning. And John Lewis asked Lillian Lewis to drive his friend home on one of the hottest days in Atlanta. And she said, no, I will not do it. And that was an argument. I said, well, Malu, where I'm from, that ain't really an argument, because the arguments I'm accustomed to, pans and glasses are broken and people are yelling and screaming. So that was their relationship. They were like amazingly in love. I mean, they respected each other to the utmost, and it was a great example to see two couples that operated in that manner.
Yeah,
a good woman can have that kind of effect on a man.
Absolutely.
Definitely. So Paul, we know that Congressman Lewis was put on home hospice probably somewhere around a month or so ago. but he was still, up until that date, he was still running for his position again. Can you speak on that? How is that going to play out? He had an opponent. How does that actually play out in the political arena?
So, for what I understand is it's going to be the governor is probably going to appoint someone. And when he appoints that person, I'll give you two scenarios that could possibly happen. When he appoints that person could possibly be the actual congressperson and for 2 years. Or the other scenario would be he or she will be the congressperson until November, and their name will be thrown in the hat for people to run against the person that was appointed. Now, I'm not clear on that, but one of the two are going to happen. But then again, you're dealing with John Lewis. I don't know how they're going to handle it. There's always loopholes where they can do pretty much what they want to do. Mm-hmm. So, yes, he will be either someone appointed will take his spot, or there will be an election November, which is there's going to be an election anyway. I don't know if that person who they pick will be able to just continue to stay 2 years. So it's pretty much up in the air.
How many?
Go ahead.
How many years did he hold that position? He was
30 years.
30 years.
Wow.
It's been a long time. So this is getting ready to be a big change for that district.
And how many years did you work with him, Paul?
You know what? It's hard to say because I've been in his life 20 years. And there were times, at one point I had a limousine service. He would hire me to drive him. And then one point I worked in his office for a very short period of time. Just so happened when I got to going pretty well in the office, my friend Usher, who at the time had just dropped his first album, was dropping his second album. He was my neighbor. He was like a little brother to me. I had no clue where he was going. Well, his mom called me and told me they was getting ready to go on tour with Janet Jackson. And I'm working for John Lewis. And I had to weigh between the two. Say, do I want to be around John Lewis? Or do I want to be around Janet Jackson on tour? I chose the Janet Jackson deal. I chose the Janet Jackson and Usher and went on tour. And the rest is history. But, we were family even after the entertainment thing ended. I ended up still being around. And whenever Lou needed anything, I was there for her. Because, most people, well, I guess most people understand when you are a congressperson in a particular district, you live in that district, but your job is in D.C. So John had 2 homes in Atlanta, and he had a home in D.C. Mm-hmm. And during the week, he was never there. So when Lou needed something, I was the go-to guy. I mean, she was like a mom. Both of my parents, by the way, are deceased, so it was befitting to have a John Lewis as a father figure. Absolutely. It was befitting to have a Lillian Lewis as a mother, and I cherished every moment. I loved it. There was nothing I would not do for either one of them. And it was just an amazing experience. I didn't know how blessed I was at the time. I knew it was special. You kind of know something, special is going on. But now that I look back, it was like walking with, like you said, Russ, somebody very close to the Lord. Being around Lillian, who was like the maitre d' of the family. She was the engine to some degree that allowed John to be who he was.
Yeah.
She pushed him out front as much as possible. There was nothing that he had to say, well, I need to ask my wife, or I can't do this because my wife don't want to do it. It was an understood matter that he could go forth and change the whole world, and he would have 120% support from his wife. Mm-hmm. No question whatsoever.
Yeah. And when you see figures like that, when you see Martin Luther King, you see the Malcolm X, you see, all these great leaders, even Nelson Mandela, Winnie, Coretta Scott King, Betty Shabazz, there was always a phenomenal woman beside these guys. Like even Barack, it's like, would even been Barack without Michelle, So that's good stuff there. So let me ask you a question. How did he feel about politics today in the direction of civil rights? Like, did he feel that it was still on the correct path, or that it was kind of, headed off the rails a little bit?
I couldn't get a feel because I didn't talk to him as much as I used to. But what I gathered that he was gearing up to fight a good fight. Clearly, he was very disdain about the current leadership that we have because he was very outspoken about it. So what I gather from afar and to watch his movement, I could see that he was gearing up people like you, myself, and other people to say, "Hey, do not get lost in the sea of despair. Do not
Yeah.
get caught up in the rare, the propaganda." His motto was good trouble. He wanted to see people fighting the right way,
Mm-hmm.
doing the right thing, and that's my take on where he stood at this particular point
Okay.
in our lives and in the world.
Paul, we have a couple more questions and then we will wrap up. I wanted to ask you, you've been in politics, like you said, you've kind of worked with John Lewis over the last 20 years. Would you say this is your,
On and off, on and off. Yes, go ahead.
yeah, on and off? Would you say politics is your calling? Would you say this is how you feel you're serving humanity?
Well, absolutely. Whenever you get to serve at the feet of a John Lewis and get to know a Lillian Lewis, as I would tell John, like John, you didn't do this on your own. God chose you. Well, God chose me to be in His life in that capacity. So I know that that is what I was supposed to be doing, and now I'm supposed to step it up and do even more in terms of spreading the good word, connecting people when I come when I'm introduced to someone to let them know, hey, you got to get involved the right way. You got to believe in God. You got to know that there's something within you that you
Mm-hmm.
have changed inside of you. Don't look around. My whole thing is, hey, don't think the government's going to save you. You have to save yourself.
Definitely.
And the way you save yourself is getting involved, being conscious, knowing what you're really up against. Because there's very few people. There's not enough people who understand the magnitude of what they're up against. And once you inform yourself about what's going on, then you can fight it properly. You can't fight a monster unless you know who you're fighting against and what you need, what ammunition you need to be successful.
That is so true. You have to know your opponent.
I have a question here, Paul. Uh, John Lewis, Martin Luther King, all of these guys have had big impacts on all of our lives, whether or not we agreed or disagreed with their politics. They definitely impacted all of our lives. Uh, if you had a chance to have one last conversation with John Lewis, what is it that you would like to tell him?
Wow. Great question.
Wow. You know what? Actually, Russell, I had that conversation about 4 months ago. I called him and I told him how he affected my life more when I wasn't around him. And I was able to see the magnitude of how he lived his life and the things he tried to teach me. Of course, I didn't really get it when I was around him. When I would go places and people would say, "That's John's boy, that's John's boy." And sometimes that would get old. I didn't want to be, the sidekick all the time. But when I got away from John and I realized everything he lived and everything he showed me, it showed me how, well, you know what, you got to do things a certain way. You got to do things the John Lewis way. And I shared that and I thanked him. I said, John, I really appreciate everything that you've given me. And I apologized to him for the times that I dropped the ball. And he was very grateful. He said, I told him I appreciate everything he had done. And we always ended that I love you. And he said, I love you too. And that's the conversation I wanted to have with any of my friends, with any person that has crossed my life,
Yeah.
where our paths to cross. You want to know that you love that person, or know that you're thankful for what they've given you, and it had a positive effect. So once I did that many months ago, I'm at peace, bro.
Wow,
That's
that's a
good.
beautiful
That's good stuff.
conversation. I think we have to do
Yeah,
that every day.
Yeah,
We have to do
you
that all.
yeah,
you definitely do, because you never know when the last time you're gonna have a conversation with that person.
yeah. And you know what happened just yesterday? I'm going to segue into. I got a call from Dexter Clinch out of the blue. I'm in Columbus, Ohio, just dealing with Morgan. She just got a new apartment, so I wasn't even thinking. I had just gotten the news that he had passed away, which was very tough. It was very difficult. And I get a call from Dexter Clinksdale, who was former Dallas Cowboy defensive back. He calls me out of the blue and he's like, "Paul, I'm sorry about your godfather." And because I hadn't heard from Dexter in like 3 or 4 years, and he was like, "Paul, I just need you to know, I don't want to get emotional anymore, but I got to tell you the story." He said, "Paul, I just want you to know that John Lewis really loves you." I said, "Deck, why do you say that, man?" He said, "Man, when I first saw John Lewis in the mall several years ago, Lenox Mall, and I knew he knew what he was talking about because John loved to shop. I mean, Dillard's, he was a shopper. He was an antique guy. He loved to go to antique shops and he loved to shop. So he was in Dillard's and he liked Macy's. So he was in Macy's at this particular time at Lenox Mall upstairs by the restaurant. He told me the area and everything we saw him. He said he ran into John, and Dexter told him I was a friend of Paul. At the time, Dexter was working for Jesse Jackson, and I would freelance for Jesse also. And my name is John. He said, John said, "Yeah, that's my godson. That's my godson, Paul." And Dexter said every time, no matter where he were, and when he would see John, John would mention my name, and he knew that I was connected to Dexter, and Dexter was my friend. I would often tell him how much he loved me. And that means something to hear it from someone else that you were
Yes.
not expecting that call. And I was in pain. Of course, it broke me up to hear that,
Yeah,
but
that's
it gives you strength. I
Yeah.
promise
yeah.
y'all, I ain't gonna cry no more. I'm not gonna cry anymore.
Hey,
Y'all
No.
can ask me any questions. I'm not gonna get emotional anymore.
well, that
I'm
shows
gonna
your
try not to.
that
Uh,
shows your humanity. Too many times as men, we try to hold all that in, that we just did a show on, the divine masculine and feminine, and that just proves that you have a soul
well,
and that it can be reached through
Yeah.
love.
well, at my brother's memorial, my sister called me a big crybaby, so I might be a crybaby.
Hey, there's
You
certain
know,
things that men should be able to cry about, and people
Yeah.
understand.
But you're just able to take us through some of your experiences with John Lewis, and that's amazing.
yeah.
Um, one last question. We know he read the Bible. What was some of the things John Lewis read? I like to know what people, how they soaking up their knowledge, and because he clearly he had his calling, and if there's something we can learn from him, it's definitely about perseverance and legacy. And what was some of the things he read? Did he ever tell you, "Hey, Paul, you need to read this"? Anything?
I can't recall. Well, one thing he wanted me to read was his book, Walking with the Wind. he, he definitely gave me the book, and he signed the autograph. But I
Nice.
don't think that's a good one. I'm trying to think. I'm sure there was something. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. But
Yeah.
I do know he believed in when the part about where if people call out the Lord's name and understand, you know, not having information, knowing what God wants them to do. That's pretty much what lack of knowledge. That's when our people suffer, not
Mm.
knowing what God wants them to do. And once you get the information that you are supposed to do whatever God wants you to do, that will make a big difference in everybody's doing
Wow.
God's will,
There you go.
doing the work of the Lord.
Yeah.
All right.
Wow. Well, Paul, we definitely appreciate you taking some time out to
Yes, sir.
talking with us again. We kind of feel like you're like our politics guy. You kind of keep us in the know, and you give us that real life experience of
That
everything.
inside scoop.
Yeah. Was there anything else, Russell?
No, that's about it, man. Brother, I really love you, man.
Love you guys too. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah.
Anytime you want to know any questions,
Yeah.
I'm an open book.
Yes.
Thanks for sharing, man.
So we just finished talking with Paul Debnam on the life and legacy of the amazing civil rights icon, Mr. John Lewis, who just recently passed on July 17th, 2020 at the age of 80 years old. Amazing legacy he's left behind, and Paul was a very close, personal, and professional friend of Mr. Lewis, and he just gave us this heartfelt testimony on his experiences, and we definitely appreciate that. Matters of the Heart and Soul podcast is a podcast inspired by love, God, relationships, spirituality, justice, culture, family, children, finances, freedom, personal growth, energy and vibrations, universal principles, health, education, masculine and feminine energy, music, and just all other things of the heart and soul. This is how we connect our hearts and our minds. We appreciate all of our listeners, and we look forward to the next episode. Paul, thank you so much. We appreciate you.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Peace,
right.
Brother.
Right.